Hello everyone, welcome back to my Product Design Bootcamp here on Adobe Live. It's an honor to be here. My name is Spencer Nugent. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, from Jamaica, and I'm an industrial designer or product designer, and I make stuff. And so our bootcamp this week has been focusing on how to visualize concepts in perspective, making them look and feel real and inviting, and starting to tell a story with our product sketches. So if it's your first time joining, I highly recommend that you take a look at the other episodes. Part of this experience does include assets that I've put together. So this is my website at sketchaday.com/Adobe Live. You'll find a page that I made just for all of you. It includes things like my brushes, a few books that I've authored that are available, and of course, a recap of each day with files included. So feel free to take a look at that. I've also put together helpful links and resources for you. There's what we worked on yesterday. In fact, I've updated that, and you can find the sample sketch file there and some additional videos. So welcome to day 3. We're going to be focusing on coloring and shading basics. Let me know where you're watching from. I'm watching the chat at the same time. I'm doing like 5 things. I've got 4 screens actually today. So I'll try and pay attention to the chat. Feel free to interrupt, ask questions as we go. That's one of my favorite things, is seeing the things that you think of or consider as we work. So today we're going to be looking at coloring and shading basics, and we're going to add color to a few sketches, and I'm going to show you my process when I'm visualizing concepts and some general approaches that you can take there. So there are, of course, the sample sketch files from our last session. If you want to pull those and work with those, I've also included something called a primitive shading worksheet. We're going to use that a little bit today. And of course, there's some helpful videos here as well. So let's get right into it. We're using Adobe Photoshop today. And if you've never used Photoshop, why are you here? Just kidding. If you've never used Photoshop, you can always download and try it out. So just to recap, first day we did our couch sketch here. We did 2-point perspective, 3-point, and 1-point perspective. And here we have our sketches from the second day, where we looked at the concept of form, function, context, and detail. So showing a bit of what the object is, and of course how it might work with some bit storage and a removable battery, and some additional concepts to supplement. Now in your sample sketches, you'll find a variety of sketches. There's a vacuum cleaner. If you missed yesterday, I highly recommend checking it out, because I show you kind of how to modify concepts and build out a sketch page. We've got these tape measures, a utility knife if you want to play with that, and we're going to kick things off with our worksheet here. So if you have downloaded the file, awesome. If not, that's okay. Before we talk about this, of course, you know me, if you've been here, I like to show you reference so you can connect some concepts. So let's take a look at our over shoulder shot here. And we're going to be shading objects much like this cylinder. So if you look at the cylinder here, you'll notice that the side closest to the light is receiving most of the light, so it's the brightest, and further away from the light, it's darker. And it kind of happens in a gradient, right? In fact, depending on the lighting setup, you might even get some reflected light on the edges here and so on. And you can kind of see this a similar thing happening on this object. In fact, we can see the 3 values there, 3 value shading system. So we're going to try and replicate that using a couple tools and a couple different methods today. So we're going to talk about shading first, and then we'll talk about color. All right, so let's go ahead and shade these. And I'm going to use a neutral tone. So I'm going to start with like a mid-tone gray here. And an easy way to do this is just take your polygonal lasso tool, make a selection around your object like so. In this case, we're starting with our cube. Looks like I missed a couple spots. So let's do that one more time. 1, 2, 3. Just like, there we go. Oops. There we go. So I've got that all filled in. Now, I don't want to work on the same layer that I have. In fact, digitally, what I try to do is keep the sketch on top. If you keep the sketch on top, it gives you flexibility so you can change the color later, and I'll show you how that works in a little bit. So these are my 2 sketch layers. I'm going to make a new layer and put that layer below my sketch layers, okay? Now, if just by way of helping, we'll call this top sketches, and we'll call this color, okay? We can group those together if you want. Just like that. All right, so now we have a group. So in this selection here, I'm just going to go ahead and fill that in. Looks like I grouped the wrong 2 layers together. Okay, let's try that one more time. Sort our color here, we're just going to fill that in. Now remember, if you remember what this looked like, looking at our object here, there we go. We have these 3 values. All right, so closest to the lightest, we have a primary, or sorry, a tertiary shade here, meaning this is the darkest, and then we have a mid-tone right here. So as I shade this, what I'm going to do is just make the top lighter. Okay, we can go back to our polygonal lasso tool here. You could do each of these values on a new surface if you wanted to as well. And what I like to do is actually take the gradient tool and just kind of hit that top surface, because light never hits the surface perfectly evenly. So our secondary surface closest to the light, I'm going to leave that one alone. And then we're going to switch to black here. And using my gradient, by the way, is set to foreground to transparent. That's how I typically work with my gradients. Rather than trying to blend 2 colors, just use your values to then deepen, darken, and enhance those colors that you might be using. All right, so now I'm going to start about here and just drag away from this corner until I have enough contrast, and there we have our first shaded object. If you want to spruce it up a little bit, we can come in on this secondary surface and just add a little kiss of white right there. Just very, very subtle, but just enough to make it so that our surfaces have a bit of dynamic to them and they're not perfectly flat. All right, we got, where's everyone watching from? I'm curious. I thought I saw a location there, but that was someone's name. All right, so now let's take a look at our cylinder. All right, so quick visual reference one more time, just so you can kind of see, just so you can kind of see where we're coming from here. So I've got my cylinder. All right, see that gradient right through there? We've got highlight, mid-tone, and this is called a shadow core. Okay, shadow core. Now, if I were to take my phone, for example, and let's turn on our flashlight. Okay, if I have my flashlight on the backside, see that reflected light and that shadow core that's kind of happening? All right, that's what we're going to try and replicate in our sketch, because it's a little bit more interesting than just having a simple flat gradient. All right, so I like to use the same method here, and basically what we're going to do is just take the polygonal lasso tool, and as best as I can, just follow along the sketch line. Because I have my sketch line here and it's nice and clean, if you work on your line quality, you can kind of save yourself some time and trouble when you are trying to trace shapes. Now, of course, I could use the pen tool, or I could use a combination of the elliptical marquee tool and a few other things, but I just find that this is so much faster. So I like to do it this way. We're going to go back to our mid-tone gray, fill that in. All right, we can use our marquee tool in the case of the top here, try and get it as close as possible. All right, place that on top, and now I'm going to take my white gradient and just hit that edge like so. All right. Actually, I'm gonna switch directions. It sounds a little bit weird, but you'll see why in just a sec. All right, so I'm gonna hit my top something like that. And the reason we're doing this exercise, by the way, in case you're wondering, is that think of products like a combination of simpler shapes. Okay, it's a combination of simpler shapes. All right, I am putting that on a different layer after all, because it's a little bit harder shading a cylinder, and I want to maintain some flexibility. But you can think of products as a combination of, say, a cube and a cylinder, right? So think of something like a camera. The lens could be a cylinder, the body could be a cuboid, right? So I'm just gonna select outside of my cylinder here, just this outside surface. And now, instead of shading with the gradient, okay, because it's a little bit harder, I'm actually going to go ahead and switch brushes. So I'm going to go to my personal airbrushes. You can use a soft airbrush of your own choice if you like. And I'm going to go to this air highlighter crisp, and let's check out the size. Perfect. So switch to a black, and right about here, I'm just going to paint down. And the reason I made this brush is, as you can see, there's a combination of a shadow core and some mid-tone that's happening here. And if I just switch to white on the opposite side, I get a nice highlight and shadow core. So for me, that brush saves me a lot of time when I'm shading something that is cylindrical. All right, so there you go. Pretty simple. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit for our, let me go ahead and merge these down actually, but I'm going to cheat a little bit for our cone, because you can kind of think of a cone like a cylinder, but if the cylinder were kind of pinched at the top. So I'm just going to take this, drag it over, and we'll do a quick transform just to save some time and show you how I do this. All right, now I can just drag this. Oops. We're going to scale, which button? There we go. We're going to scale this in on the top on both sides. All right. Whoa. And that gives us at least a nice little start. We can scale this out like so. Just bring these in, kind of pinch at the top. So this is the way I like to cheat it and just get it done really quickly. But in this instance, we can just paint and now erase a little bit on the outside like so. And there's my cone. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Now, if I were going to do that by hand, what I probably would do is a similar thing that we did before. I'm just going to cut that so we still have it. We can use our polygonal lasso tool like so. Oops, just like that. Go ahead, pick our midtone and fill that in. Actually, maybe a little bit lighter. Let's go back to our cube here. There we go. A little bit lighter. And now with the airbrush on top of all this highlighter crisp airbrush that I have, new layer. I'm just going to go ahead and paint this in, and we'll start with our white. Just kind of paint to the top here. A little bit of a fan going to the same point. And then we'll switch to our black. I'm just going to rotate my canvas. Remember, rotating your canvas makes it a little bit easier sometimes, depending on how you like to draw. Now, there's a little bit of over painting here, so I could have kept my marquee selection up, but if not, we can just paint and erase, and we're in a pretty good spot. All right, just like that. So hopefully you're picking up on the pattern here, right? Solid base color, and then adding our highlights and shadows as a part of the shape. Now, a sphere, I almost said a circle. A sphere, how do we go ahead and do that? Well, we can try and take our marquee tool and get as close as possible, something like that. If you want, you can go select, where are you? Transform selection, there we go. And now I can transform the selection and get it closer to my shape. Pretty handy if you want to use something like the marquee tool. Hit enter to commit that. We're going to go back and pick our midtone on my cube just so that everything's nice and consistent. Let's fill that in. And now with the sphere, what actually happens is you can kind of think of a sphere like the top of this cylinder being pinched in like a curve. Again, like I said, I come from a math, computer science, physics background and happened upon design. So I like to think about and understand how things work so that sorry, just looking at some of the chat there. I like to figure out how things work and how they're put together so that we can make them look great. All right, let's go ahead and I'm going to show you here. So think of a sphere, almost like if you were to take half of the cylinder here and kind of curve in like so. So all these, the sides of the cylinder are being curved in. Kind of think of it that way. All right, that's going to give you a sphere. Can't write today. Sphere, right? And the same thing would happen on the bottom. And in the case of the cone, remember, it's like a cylinder where we're taking the top and kind of scaling into a single point. That's how I like to think of it, and that's how you get that shape and the shape of our highlight and our shadow core here. So in this case of a circle, right, if this is our middle point here, and normally we would have, say, our shadow core on a cylinder like so, we're just going to wrap that, okay? We're just going to wrap that down like so. Now, this is assuming our light source, which is something I totally didn't talk about, but we'll talk about shadows in a second. This is assuming that we have a light source. That's a light bulb, everyone, coming from the side like that. So if we were to angle this, and now our light source is a little bit above, it's a little bit more interesting and familiar, right? Because normally in a house or room, the lights are on top. So in that case, this shape, that little crescent shape, right, that's making up our shadow core would now be rotated like so. Okay, and similarly, we're going to get some sort of highlight. Now, I don't like to have the highlight be this kind of stretched out shape, so usually what I'll do is focus on a small area like so and kind of shade that in. All right, so now that you know the how, let's do the what. I'm going to make a new layer, and let's start with our white, assuming our light source is coming from the top and the left. Back to my airbrushes here. I'm going to use this air highlighter crisp and just kind of hit this area right around here. Something like that. Okay, if we want to go bigger, we can go bigger too. And now on the back side, I want to do this on a new layer just so I can kind of massage this as we go. But here we go. We're just going to brush in our shadow core. Remember, if you're using something like a Wacom tablet, it is pressure sensitive. So the harder you push, the more intense the color is going to get. I am slow this morning. Sorry, everyone. Okay, I'm going to try and finish on time today, too. All right, I'm going to try and finish on time. All right. So now what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and select just this sphere. Is on the back side here, paint in white just a little bit for some reflected light. Okay, and that's because it is resting on the ground, and I just want there to be a little bit of a highlight on the back like so. All right, it's just going to make it a little bit more interesting. Maybe tone that down with the opacity. Okay, so there we go. That's how I would shade primitive geometry, and we can kind of think about more complex objects using this geometry as well. All right, so let's talk about shadows as well, being cast by the object. So we've talked about shading on an object, how to make it look 3D. Now let's talk about shadows on or being cast by a light source. So layer 7, I'm going to call this shadows, and we'll start with just drawing in red here. Okay, oops. Let's go back to my stencil. Boom. All right. There we go. Okay, so if I have a light bulb somewhere here, right, some light source, and light's being cast at a certain angle, right, you want to pay attention to the angle that your light is being cast. And you get to decide. You have superpowers as an illustrator or product concept designer. Also, we want to think about relative to the object. Okay, so if there's an imaginary circle here, I could have my light here, right? I could have my light here. I could even have my light here or here. I'm going to pick this position, A, we'll call it A, for my light. So if this is my position A, and this is the direction of my light, what you actually want to do is just go ahead, and I have a whole video on this that's attached, or not attached, but linked to on that website, sketchaday.com/Adobe Live for the presentation this week. All right. And what you want to do is pay attention to these points on the top and the bottom. There's going to be an imaginary point back here. So all we have to do is take this direction and go through these lines, but we want this to be parallel. Okay. Want this to be parallel. Now we're going to take a look. Let's see if I can do this in green so we can see the difference. We're going to, that's a better green. Okay. Now I'm going to take a look at the bottom and decide which direction. So I lied. I'm going to go with my light going this way from the bottom because it's going to make for a better shadow. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we find the intersection points. Are you lost yet? Now we find the intersection points. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now this one doesn't matter because it's kind of inside the object. So really the resulting shadow you're going to get is a shape like this. Okay. So you can calculate how a shadow is going to look pretty much on pretty much any object. Okay. if you use this technique. You just kind of have to think about it a little bit creatively. Let's take the same direction here for the light and everything. I'm just going to pick these points on the top and the bottom of my cylinder. I'm imagining that the bottom of the cylinder is an ellipse, just like that. And let's take the same direction, 2, 3, 4, and just hover over here so I can get the direction down, 2, 3, 4. All right, so we're gonna go with 1, 1, 2, where does this one go? 3 and 4. So what you're gonna end up with is something that is curved and looks like this, right? And this is actually, think of it kind of like this ellipse, just shifting up and over a bit, right? But that's gonna be the shadow of our cylinder. Okay, so we just took reference points on the top, reference points on the bottom, and cast. And as you can imagine, same thing's going to happen here. We just project, decide the direction, boom. And in the case of a cone, it's really easy because we just connect those lines tangentially. All right. In the case of a sphere, what we want to do is think about the direction of the light, right? Like so. And what I like to do is draw an ellipse that is orthogonal or 90 degrees, if you will, okay, to that light source. All right, and then you can take these points and you can imagine what this shape is going to look like. We're going to go down like so. Okay, we're going to draw a corresponding ellipse like so. And now we're going to project through. And let's see, let's make sure we have the right direction over like so. Like so. And so basically what you end up with is a shape kind of like this. That's an ellipse, okay? And we're going to shade that in. It's kind of like an elongated ellipse because we get light being cast by the cross section of the sphere. All right, so now you're a master of shadows. We're masters of shading. We're going to move ahead and talk about 2 techniques for shading our actual project. So decide what sketch you want to use, what sketch you wanted to use on your page. If you want to use the drill page, that is totally fine, and that's great. So I'm switched to my document here. I've got layer 15, and let's see, we've got our, I totally forgot how I organized this. Like I said, I am kind of a messy illustrator anyways. All right, so there's group 1 with our sketch lines. I'm going to make a new layer. And in terms of like how I like to organize my layers, I should mention, let's go ahead and just show you in this little spot here. In terms of layer organization, what I like to do is kind of organize them this way. If this is a layer in 3D, we've got another layer here, and another layer here. This first layer here is going to be my color, right? So, or in other words, the color is going to be behind the sketch lines. Sketch lines are on the top. And here's where I like to do my highlights and shadow. And then additionally, sometimes above the sketch, I like to have an additional set of effects. Okay, so that's going to be, I'm not going to draw anything there. We'll just say effects. Effects right above all of this. Okay, and that's things like blooming, or it might be little spots of white that I might add to a sketch and so on. So this is kind of the pattern I'm going to be following here as we shade in our drill. So I'm just going to leave this in the middle. And of course, at the end of the day here, I will upload this document as well, so you can download it. All right, so let's use a couple of techniques. Normally, illustrating a product design sketch page, I would use the same technique across sketches, but I want to show you a variety on the same page here. So we'll start with our first, which is to simply outline our object as quickly as we can. Boom. Just like so. Doesn't have to be totally perfect. We can always come back and tweak things as we want. Takes a little bit of practice, but basically what I'm doing here is just lifting my Wacom pen from the screen after each tap that I make. All right. So we'll double tap, and now that is filled. I'm going to try and do, I mean, I don't want to do a completely generic drill, so let's do like orange and gray or something like that. So I'll start with some gray, and I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. And now we can either use the polygonal lasso tool again, or we can just jump to something like a hard round brush and then decide, oops, that was weird, and then decide what parts we want this to be in orange. So I have a solid color here of gray that is painted in for my base shape. So I'm going to just control click on that layer. That makes a selection. Working on layer 18 now, I can add my orange. So let's pick a nice orange. I want to go something a little more reddish orange. It's kind of hard for me to see on my screen with this highlight that I'm getting from a light here. All right, so that looks pretty good. So now I'm just going to take this and paint in whatever portion of this drill I want to be orange, and I've decided to pick the back here. All right, so we've got the back like so, and usually on a sketch page as well, I should mention, I try to have the main object, the main sketch, be a colored sketch and have the brightest pops of color or special effects, things like that. And the reason for that is, well, it's the most important on the page. And since these are all the same color, I'm just going ahead and keeping this all on the same layer. If I introduce another color, I like to put that on a separate layer, but this is the first step in the process. Just fill in with that flat color. Okay, now going back to our primitives here, I think it's this, nope, where are we? Right there. Going back to our primitives here, I'm just going to drag this over right next to my file so we can switch between. Remember, we have a 3-value system, okay? So lightest on top, and then we have our differences as a surface changes. If you want to observe this in real life, you can always just take a look around whatever room you're in, take a look at the walls and notice how the walls change in value as those walls change angle or are different in angle one to another. All right, so I've got my base tones here. This is good enough. Now I'm going to make a new layer, and we're going to go ahead and just airbrush our highlights and shadows. Decide where your light source is in this case. For me, I'm going to go ahead and pick, all right, I'm going to go ahead and pick top and to the right. So light bulb, light source is coming from this direction. So just to show you how to think about this, again, this is kind of like a cylinder, right? We just shaded a cylinder. Okay, this is also kind of like a cylinder. You can kind of think of it in that way. And we also have some sort of cuboid here, right? So kind of like we had before, we have one value here. This is closer to the light, so I'm going to go 2. And then on the back side, we're going to go 3 in terms of value. On the top portion here of our drill, we're going to have a shadow core or shadow here, and up toward the top we're going to do highlight. This is like a cone, okay, and remember that cone had that tapering highlight, tapering shadow, so we're going to do that, and so on and so on. Okay, so that's how I like to think of let's make a new layer. That's how I like to think of shading these things. Okay, so let's go ahead and do some of the backside here. I'm just going to pick this part of the drill, and we can make kind of a general selection like this. And then if you hold Control and Alt and click on our orange here, we're going to find the intersection of those surfaces. So now I'm going to paint light and dark with my gradient. So I'm just going to hit that with my gradient like so, just like that. All right. And we can also, since this edge here is a little bit toward the light, I'm going to start painting with some white in here. Now this will give me a chance to talk about another brush that I like to use, and that is, where are you? My markers. So I'm just going to pick this basic marker, All right, and you'll see here when I start painting that it kind of gives you this stripy look. So I can kind of paint a little bit of a highlight there, right, and lighten that up, maybe a little bit toward the bottom here. We can always erase what we don't need, of course, or tweak that as we go. All right, so there I have some tone difference on the back of this drill. We can do the same thing on the battery section here. Sorry, I was just checking time to make sure we're good. But you get the, hopefully you get the idea. Lights, shadows, and so on. So in this case, normally what I would do is hit multiply. In this case, if I hit multiply, then I lose some of the white. But that's okay. We can always reclaim that as we outer highlight. The reason for that is so that just in case I decide to change the color of, say, the drill, the company is like, hey, we want to see, is that the right layer? Yeah, we want to see a drill in a different color. Why is it not? My hue saturation is not working for some reason. Okay, there we go. So I can slide this slider on hue saturation and notice that the value is somewhat consistent. I may have to make some tweaks here if I decide, hey, you know what, this is actually a Ryobi product. We could just do it that way and use that Ryobi color. All right, so back to our shading here. Let's make somewhat quick work of this little selection. I'm going to keep this pretty chill. And there's our dark. And now on the back side of the handle, this is where I'll just use something like an airbrush instead of my marker. We'll get back to the marker in just a sec. Where are you? There you are. Hello, my friend. All right, so now I'm just going to throw in a little shadow core on the back side and try and follow the contour of the shape you're trying to shade, just like that. We can go a little bit bigger, get some mid-tone in right there. And on a new layer, I'm going to use white, right, just to lighten this up. Now, we're not focusing on texture today. That'll be tomorrow, but texture would be also a great addition to something like this. We can switch to my marker here if we want to add a little highlight on this battery. Okay, just on that edge. You can do the same thing up here. And this brush does follow the direction you sketch in, so it's pretty handy in terms of filling in some of these areas on our sketch as well. Let's go ahead and shade on our main body here. And to do that, depending on the surface finish, right? Depending on the surface finish, you might want to go with something. Why are my keyboard commands not working all of a sudden? Okay, we could go with the marker brush and add that highlight, right? You get that little kind of stripy look to it right there. And we can keep painting and just filling that in. If you need to, you can always erase, like I said. Sometimes when I'm going quickly, I like to just kind of overpaint and then erase what I don't need. Now we can shade in with black. All right, nice big marker here. And erase what we don't need. So we want this button to pop. So I'm just going to erase that and any over painting that was done, just like so. So I did mention I sometimes add special effects. So what I mean by that is things like a bloom. So if I grab some white and hop back to our airbrush here, I may decide that, you know, right on this spot on the chuck, I want there to be kind of this white that obscures the sketch lines a little bit. So sometimes I'll do that just to add an effect in the sketch itself. Okay, so we're making good progress. We'll keep going here. Let's see. So hopefully you can kind of see the layer organization and how I'm trying to think about shading this in with that highlight and shadow core as we go. All right, in this case, I'm just gonna make a selection here for these little grooves. We'll make a series. Checking in on the chat. Did you make the rules here? Oh, thanks, Cody Beer, for holding things down. But yeah, let me know if y'all have any questions. Feel free to drop comments. We got one in YouTube. Looks like you have several light sources. In reality, yes. It's not so much that there's just one, because any environment is going to be um, reflecting other surfaces or reflecting light from other surfaces as they bounce off the walls and so forth. So that is totally a possibility. Now, we did talk about shadows a little bit. I didn't mention drop shadows. With a drop shadow, you can just assume that the light is coming from directly above. And to do those, I like to kind of just do an abstract selection um, like so, that just kind of follows the general shape of the product, right? So it's just meant to be something to help ground your object to the page. I'm going to modify this a little bit like so. And we're just going to use a solid black, fill that in, and then drop the opacity, something like so. So now it has a little bit more of a presence on the page. So we'll keep shading in. For these grooves, I think the perfect brush here is going to be my marker brush. So I'm going to jump back to my marker brush. You can kind of see the layers are starting to get crazy already. And I'll show you a trick for those who like to work in a disorganized way, like I am. I'll show you a little trick for finding those layers if you ever get lost. All right, so right in this little groove here where we have our shadow core, I'm just making this section of my groove a little darker, and then we can kind of fill in just a little bit of shadow. And the idea there, by the way, is to show, right, if we zoom in here, it's to show that this surface, okay, it's maybe a little flat there, then there's a little bit of a curve, and then the surface continues. So if we're a little bit darker toward this edge here, it's going to reinforce that idea. If you want to get super detailed, dang near photorealistic with things, not near photorealistic, but more realistic, then we can add a little bit of white to that edge. So when we zoom out, wrong button there, I was moving layers. When we zoom out, you'll see that, oh, there's a little bit of light catching the edge. Now we run into a little bit of a problem, which is why I said sometimes I like to leave or have the special effects on the very top, because we have that black line. It looks kind of weird. But if I just come in and paint like so, okay, it looks a little bit better that way. So that's why I like to have that surface on top. All right, I'm going to hide this, do it the right way. Boom. All right. So the trick I was talking about, oh, I did draw on the same layer. Oh, well, we'll just do it again. The trick I was talking about is if you have the direct select tool or the move tool selected, you can right click and Photoshop will tell you which layer is closest to the top. So if I click group 1, it's going to select group 1 because it's likely the area that I'm selecting. Or if I want to select the base color, that is going to be layer 17 because I know that's the first layer that I worked on. So that's how I like to be disorganized and pull some order out of my chaos. Let's see. Clever is asking, have you done this sort of thing using alcohol markers on paper? Yes, this is what I do. I actually like to use alcohol markers on paper. Thanks for the wonderful question. And like I said at the beginning of the stream, I just finished writing a book about using markers and using pens and drawing in perspective. So you can check that out if you go to the webpage I created for this live experience. And that is at sketchaday.com/Adobe Live. So there you'll find this sketch page if you want to try and color it yourself, as well as links to videos and other resources that you might find helpful if you like the presentation and this sort of thing. So I appreciate the fantastic question. Another reason I make lots of layers is as I'm drawing, if I'm moving just super quickly, I don't have time to go find the right layer all the time and make sure it's all working. So I just like to make those new layers. Sure, sometimes it's a headache in the long run, but it's much more important for me if I'm working for a client to move more quickly than to necessarily be the most organized. Because in my case, anyways, I'm not handing over original sketch files and that sort of thing. Just wanted to paint in a little bit of a shadow here on our handle, and usually I'll do that in black and then adjust the opacity as I go just to make sure things are feeling okay. All right, so we'll keep adding some highlights and shadows here using our airbrush highlighter crisp. Love that brush. Like so. Okay, and I'm just going to go ahead and take some more black. In this case, I will pick the layer that we referenced here and use this marker brush. Little handy thing here at the top of your layer, or sorry, your brush window here, you have your recent brushes. So I can tap through the recent brushes I selected on. All right, so if you see me scrolling through that, that is... if you see me scrolling up through that, that is why. There's a question here. How long will you keep the Adobe Live page up on my website? At least, I'll probably just leave it up there. Don't worry about it. I'll leave it up there. So you can always go there. If I do more Adobe Live appearances, I'll just separate the sections out and keep going. So no worries there. I got you. All right. So I'm just taking some black here and with my marker shading in a little bit, and we can kind of do the same thing on this back surface. Remember, if the angle you're drawing at is weird, you can rotate the canvas, kind of get that in. Got a heavy hand today. This is why I shouldn't have done it on the same layer, because I may want to adjust these value shadings at different opacities. So just paint in black, adjust the opacity. That's how I like to work, because it's just a lot easier that way. All right, so we'll just shade in on the side. Let's zoom out a bit. Cool. Now on the top, I'm just going to use the polygonal lasso tool since these are kind of flat areas. One here. Oh, come on, there we go. And two. These are kind of flat areas. And they are closest to my light source. I'm just going to make a stylistic choice on this one, just like that. All right, so now new layer, gradient. I'm just going to drag this like so, and let's adjust as we go. In this case, I'm going to take a soft eraser and we'll clean up a little bit. Just so it's not as intense in a couple spots. There we go. All right, so that's looking pretty good, feeling 3D. All right. I'm really tempted to throw some texture on this, but there's a lot more to do in terms of finishing up our sketch here. All right, I want this to be kind of a special effect thing, so I'm just going to tap, 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 and hold shift, and that's going to give me a nice clean straight line. Okay, so if you click in one spot to the next, it'll give you a straight line. Just like that. Just like that. All right. Now on the back side, I also like to kind of add a little bit of white lines. And the reason for that is, again, this idea of reflected light. There might be a light source on the back side of this drill that I want to take into account. All right. So even though, and I did cheat on the drop shadow as well. So the rule, think of the things I've talked about as guidelines and not so much hard and fast rules. Okay. At least that's what I tell myself so I can sleep at night. Now, if this shadow is shiny, we may end up with a reflection. Oops. If this shadow is shiny, we may end up with a reflection of our drill here. I'm just going to make a selection. And let's see. I'll just make a layer here. And I just want to paint in, just with my hard round brush, in black, just a rough shape here. Okay, so I'm just looking at the shape above and thinking to myself, what would that look like if the top were a mirror? Okay, so it's a very subtle effect, but we're going to throw that in. Just a little bit of a black here. Like so. And now I'm going to drop the opacity way down. Right now it's set to 30%. Let's just keep dropping that. All right, so very, very subtle. Okay, but there's a little bit of a reflection in that top surface of the battery now. Okay, reflections happen where surface is nice and shiny and polished. So this has got to be like a premium drill. So a little bit of eraser to make that more subtle, and that will help it, not be too overbearing, not be too overpowering. Okay, we got more we can add here. Jumping back to my marker brush. Think of the way you show depth as contrast in value. Okay, so even on this section of our drill here, I may end up with a little light catching these edges. We can always adjust the opacity as we go, just like so. I forgot as well to include a little bit of shadowing, a little bit more shadowing here. All right, so that's just going to help this feel 3D. We were kind of moving quickly yesterday. So bring your questions as well for tomorrow's wrap-up stream. We're going to be focusing on texture. So I'll have some additional sketches that are a little bit more friendly in terms of texture, but I'll also show you how we can add some texture to this, specifically the grip here of our drill, and any plastic parts, as well as using things like Adobe Stock to get textures for free that you can use in your sketch. All right, where was I? Okay. We added our black. Oops, wrong white. Let's zoom back in here. I'm going to control click on that layer. What just happened? I think I lost my color window. I think I lost my colors. Okay, there we go. Ooh, we got it back. We got it back. I'm going to close that group. All right, cool. So we're back with our whites. So now I just want to drop that opacity down. So again, it's not overbearing, but on a new layer, right on the very edge, if we want to, we can add, my professor used to call these in college bird poops, but just think of it like a little bit of a crisp highlight on these edges right here. So I can sketch that in just like that. Okay, and just in these little corners right through there. Something like that. All right, one more. And I'll carry this sometimes, this little peak of the highlight all the way up in a line. Okay, so now we have that little highlight that's a part of our little detail there. So as you can see, we can keep going on this and adding those highlights where we need, even places like here. And this is all in the same kind of effects layer that I was talking about. Now, I did miss the opportunity to also show the depth in these grooves. So we'll go ahead and do that real quick. All right, so boom. We'll just use this marker brush. The marker brush here is also pressure sensitive, but there's also buildup to the markers. So if you've ever used a real marker, right, you'll know that there is buildup to that marker. So that's another reason I do enjoy using this brush. All right, so I'm going to show you another quick way to shade this in. And one of my favorite ways to do that is by using a wash. All right, so we can do a wash in a couple ways. I'll show you one way here real quick. Nice big marker brush. Let's make a new layer. Nice big marker brush. Let's make sure this is below our sketch layer. Ooh, all the way down. Okay. Should be below our sketch layer. All right. I think that's the wrong sketch. So there we go. So if I wanted to, I could also take this orange, for example, and say, create a wash on our sketch. Maybe we go up and down like that. And now that we have our wash, what I can do is just use this as a textural element on the page, or not textural rather, but tonal element, or think of it like a base color, almost like if you're shading with or on toned paper, for example. So if you're traditional like myself and you've used Canson paper, it's basically that technique. Okay, so and now we just take an airbrush and get the important bits. Get a little bit of shadow core, like so. I need to adjust my my pressure sensitivity on my tablet. It's like really sensitive today. Okay. We can just kind of tone things. Tone things this way with an airbrush, right? And that's just enough to bring out some value and three-dimensionality in this sketch that I would consider to be more of an auxiliary sketch to our main sketch. Like it's not the star of the show, right? But it's a part of the show, just not the star of the show. All right, maybe a little bit of a highlight there, and like so. All right, and we can also do the same thing using something like, let's see, I've got these background brushes here. Here's a watercolor texture wash. Let's see what that looks like. Oops. Okay, so I can take this brush, right? And right now it looks kind of like that. This is actually a sample from real ink. So I'm gonna actually right click here and rotate my brush like so, and kind of just use this different sizes. All right, just to kind of wash that. And now if I want, we can erase bits of this, right? Make it a little bit lighter around the edges. So you do pick up some of that texture, if you will, from that fill. We can lower the opacity just a little bit, and then kind of do the same thing on a new layer, airbrush with a bit of, let's see, let's go back to our airbrush with a bit of black and white. All right, that looks pretty good right there. Do the same thing on the other side, just like so. All right. And let's go to some white. Normally I do this on a separate layer, but we'll just boogie here so we can wrap up. Okay, so we're coming to the end of day 3 today. I hope you were able to pick up some useful information. A lot of these techniques I do use as well when I'm illustrating other things. Like it's not just product design. So think of interesting ways to work this into your own workflow. And maybe you'll find a way to save some time, right? Because as I said, time is kind of money when you're a freelancer like myself, independent creative, and you are doing stuff for clients. Again, another advantage of having this, let's see, there we go. Having this solid color is we can go ahead and change the color if we want, right? It's like, oh, here's a different brand. Here's a different look, right? So we saved a bunch of time by working in this way strategically. Okay. So once again, be sure to check out that website at, let's see, here we are, sketchaday.com/Adobe Live. Lots of resources there for you on day 3. I will also upload today's working files, so I'll add that link right under here in files at the top of the page. We have a link to my brushes and books that are helpful, and of course recaps for each day, so be sure to check that out. And with that, thanks for hanging with me. Thanks for being here. I hope to see you tomorrow. Invite a few friends. This will be our last hurrah together for some time, so I had fun. And just remember to think of ways to break things down so that you can understand them a bit easier. Okay, it doesn't have to be super complicated, and you can really just take things apart visually, focus on the basics and the simple elements, and that'll help you as well. Remember to try that worksheet out, download those files, get your hands dirty, and see how that works out for you. Okay. All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks much. And I'll see you tomorrow, bright and early. Tell your friends. All right. See you tomorrow.